Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Prop Swap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bets, take your profit, find out how. PropSwap.com. Download the Prop Swap app today. You know what I want to know? What Joel Embiid's MVP odds just changed to? I know the Sixers' odds to win the championship have drastically made a change, but Joel Embiid was the favorite to win the MVP. Have they gone up even more? Check that out and prop swap that, because I got in on Joel Embiid to win the MVP the other day. I finally said, all right, I'm going to just cave in and do it. He was like plus 250 or something. So I said, it's just going to keep going up. I mean, eventually at the end of the year, he's going to be minus 125, so at least I got in at plus 250. All right, let's get Football at 4 rolling here. A couple days before the Super Bowl, Eagles offseason, some things to discuss. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, if there was a trade in the NFL, Simmons and Embiid, like, what would the level of trade be?
Oh, that's a great one, because normally in the NFL, you don't see a star traded for a star. It's usually for picks, and usually if it's a star, it's a wide receiver or a quarterback, sometimes a defensive end. When was the last really good player-for-player trade? Man,
Right. Would this be like
that's a
two
good one.
quarterbacks getting traded for each other? Like, if you would you like say this would be like, well, Stafford got traded for Goff last year.
Yeah, but Goff was kind of like the throw-in with the first-round picks.
Yeah, true.
It would
I
be
mean,
like if the,
I guess to our audience, there's a lot of Simmons haters. He could be the throw-in.
Yeah, I guess
he
so.
would be
That's
the
a good
Goff,
point.
the former number 1 overall pick, who
Right.
had been to the like Super Bowl, and then you trade him for Matthew Stafford, who's James Harden. I think Harden's probably more impactful as a player in the NBA than Stafford had been in the NFL. But
Right.
I was just thinking about that. Like, this is like a lot of times at the trade deadline, you see trades, but it's like guys trying to switch contracts and bury. You don't see like star for star in season very often. It might happen in the off season, sign and trade stuff, but at the deadline to get star for star like this, you don't really see that too often.
No, you don't. And obviously, even in the NBA, you don't see something like this that often, unless of course somebody has to force their way out. But like, if you go back to the Oladipo trade, that was never considered at the time fair value. Now it wound up being pretty good, right? What the Rockets? Wait, Oladipo went from the Pacers to where?
Miami.
He was involved. I'm sorry, in the Paul George trade, right? He went from Indianapolis. Paul George was on Indianapolis, and then he went to
OKC.
Where?
Oklahoma
OKC,
City.
right. And Oladipo was part of that trade, and he wasn't the Oladipo at the time, but he turned out to be a really good player.
Yeah.
That helped, and so did Sabonis. Turned out to be a good player for them. But yeah, you don't. It's sort of rare. But I tell you, Mike, I think that the Nets. It's funny because I was listening to some New York sports talk radio really quickly. They think it's a win for them, and of course, Sixers fans think it's a win for them. And I honestly look at it, and I think that, even if Ben Simmons never really improves as a shooter, when you put him with Kyrie, if Kyrie ever gets back full time, and of course if Durant stays healthy, they're still pretty good. I mean, this is going to be a fun rivalry, I think.
Well,
for the next few
here's my
years.
question then, Moshe. All right, there's so many questions, but Ben Simmons hasn't played. He's not mentally ready. Will he be mentally ready? They play in Philadelphia in exactly 1 month from today. So, 2 questions. 1, will he play in that game? And 2, will he appear in a game for the Nets previous to March the 10th? Or will he finally be mentally ready to play conveniently the day after the Sixers host the Nets?
Well, to answer that question, I would have to know, are the Nets withholding money from him the way the Sixers are until he's ready to play? All right, let's say they are. Then I think he's ready in 2 weeks. Let's say they're not withholding money the way the Sixers were doing. Then I think he probably takes the month, maybe a little bit longer. So that's really where the key to this all is follow the money.
Well,
right?
I would imagine that Simmons shows up to practice or does whatever they ask him to do, that he will get his paycheck. He will just be a guy who now is getting into game shape.
Right. If that's the case, he should be ready to go in 2 weeks.
Okay. Well, they play in a month. I'm interested to see if he's on the floor in that game.
Yeah. Now, here's another great Eagles parallel, right, that we can draw as we get into football.
Yeah.
It was what? Was it yesterday or the day before that Steve Nash, with a microphone in front of his face, said, we are not trading James Harden.
He
right?
said that. He said it this afternoon, Moshe.
Oh, he said it again today.
He said today. They asked him point blank. It was either today or last night. I saw the interview this morning, and he said, I haven't been told that he doesn't want to be here. I'm every indication is that he's fine. He likes it here.
How can you ever take anything Steve Nash says now? And listen, it's not his fault. He's acting on behalf of the company, but it's a press conference still, nonetheless. How can you ever take anything that man says with any credibility? And that's kind of how we talked about the way Howie Roseman and the Eagles, fully committed in a press conference at the end of the year to Jalen Hurts. So to do anything other than have Jalen Hurts as their starting quarterback in 2022 would make a liar, theoretically, of Howie Roseman at the press conference.
Well, I'm glad you went down that road because, John Clayton, who I think we both respect, especially if any opinions from John, his Seattle opinions. Okay?
Right.
Forget his opinions about the rest of the league. His Seattle opinions. He works in Seattle. He has a show in Seattle. And he comes on this show and says, it's the most ridiculous story I've covered in 50 years of covering the NFL about Russell Wilson getting traded, right? Well, then Albert Breer today essentially says, I think he's going to get traded. And let me take a guess. Oh, I'll say Philadelphia. You bring up Roseman, and it made me think of that, and I bring to you, that would be a trade. That would be something. Russell Wilson getting traded would be like James Harden getting traded.
They really would be. And the only issue, it's not really an issue. The only thing you can say about what John Clayton said was that he was very staunchly and adamantly, he was vehement that Russell Wilson was not going to get traded in this ridiculous story, but he probably said it to you a month ago, right? And
3 weeks ago,
Things change, just like Adrian Wojnarowski, who is as respected as they come as far as NBA insiders, just about, 36 hours ago, basically said this Harden Sixers, it's not what it's meant to be. It's not what it's being reported to be. And then all of a sudden his tune changed this morning pretty much, where he started to talk about more conversations and traction. So
but isn't it to me, Moshe, okay? It doesn't add up to Russell Wilson getting traded if you look at Pete Carroll still the coach. Why would a 70-year-old Pete Carroll want to start over with a new quarterback? Like, if you've made the decision in the Seattle organization that Pete's going to come back and be our guy, aren't you giving him the quarterback?
Yeah, but I think you're not looking at it from the correct lens. I don't think Pete Carroll is the one that wants Russell Wilson elsewhere. I think Russell Wilson, from what I understand, is the one who wants to be elsewhere. So if Russell Wilson, remember, Pete Carroll likes to run the ball a lot. Russell Wilson has been enjoying throwing the ball. And so if there's a philosophical difference there that forces the quarterback to want a different scenario, a different environment, you could understand how the narrative would change. If Russell Wilson says, listen, I've had fun, but I want out, it really doesn't matter if somebody from the Seahawks has told John Clayton that we're not moving him. It's a non-story. If he wants out and he pulls a Carson Wentz sort of and says, I'm not, I really don't want to be here, that may force their hand. I'm not saying I think it's going to happen. I would tend to think it doesn't until all of a sudden it does,
Right. No, your view of the way you explain that is right. It might not be Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll might say, but I guess I'm looking at it as, wouldn't the organization have had some sort of powwow and said, hey, Russell, do you want to be here? Do you want to, what's the deal? Because I think that wouldn't that affect their decision on the coach?
You would think so. You would think.
So I guess I'm thinking of it in that way.
Without being privy to conversations, I just don't know if Russ said, I need some time to think about things, or I'm leaning toward coming back. I think I'll be fine. But you just never, just like James Harden, the Nets kept saying, well, we think he wants to be here.
Right.
All of us, we've never heard of this stuff that he wants not to be here. And then all of a sudden he doesn't want to be here.
Right. Because Albert Breer's piece said, hey, I originally would have said New Orleans would have made the most sense until Sean Payton left. So now I'm going to send him to the NFC East. And then, of course, the story about Roseman was a part of the front office that wanted to draft Russell Wilson, and that this would kind of be the redemption of them getting him back here.
Right. And if I read that Breer report or sort of story correctly,
I wouldn't call it a report.
He was sort of
said, "I'm guessing."
on.
It wasn't a report. He was answering a mailbag question from a reader, and he said, "If I'm guessing, he'll be traded, and if I'm guessing, it would be Philadelphia."
Right. So he's himself is just kind of analyzing a situation that's based on a hypothetical as well. By the way, did you see the video of Russell Wilson leaving the locker room at the
saw it on your
signing a kid's
I saw
hat?
it on your Twitter account.
Well, how amazing! The content just creates itself. Now, people came at me on Twitter like, "Of course he signed the hat." All I wrote was this: "It's an interesting hat to sign." It wound up being an Eagles hat.
Well, and if you notice, it's
people
funny.
acting like I'm saying that's a hidden agenda message or something like that.
Well, if you notice, Moshe, okay, so you tweeted this, so I watched it. I'm like, you're like, "Oh, interesting hat choice." So he comes and he's signing the hats. The kid gives him a hat, and it's an Eagles hat. The kid next to him had an Eagles hat on too.
Yeah.
Right? Did you notice that?
Yeah. It's crazy.
So just for the listeners out
were at the Pro Bowl.
For the listeners who don't know what we're talking about, at Geoff Mosher NFL, the Pro Bowl, they're all coming down the tunnel, and there's a bunch of fans right there at the tunnel. And Wilson kind of breaks off as the players are going out the tunnel to the field, and he breaks off to sign autographs and give all these people high fives. And then some kid gives him his hat and a Sharpie, and the hat is an Eagles hat, and he just gives his autograph on the hat and gives it back to the kid.
I mean, the way you look at it, that hat could have been it could have been a Hulk Hogan hat, and he would have signed it. I don't think he saw the Eagles hat and said, "Oh, I definitely want to sign that."
Well, is he signing it if it's a Rams, 49ers, or Cardinals hat?
The way he just grabbed it and signed it, he probably would have, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
it's just so funny of all the hats, right?
Yeah,
that get thrown in front of his face to sign. He winds up signing an Eagles hat.
Moshe, do you think, while we're on the topic of trades and quarterbacks, do you think Kirk Cousins, Carr, that level of guy will be moved this offseason?
I don't think Kirk Cousins will be moved. I don't think the Vikings are going to find a whole lot of great value for Kirk Cousins, and I don't think they're ready to kind of build upon someone new with this draft that's not loaded in upper echelon talent. And they've got enough talent, I would think, with Dalvin Cook, with Thielen and Jefferson. If they can get healthier on defense, I think that the new coach and the new GM are going to think, hey, we're not that far away, especially with 7 seeds now. So we've got him on the books for 30 some odd million. I could see them maybe drafting a quarterback to try to groom or making a move there. But I tend to think Kirk Cousins will stay. And as far as the Las Vegas Raiders are concerned, that's a little bit more of a wild card to me, because I just don't know what's going through Josh McDaniels' brain on, does he want his own kind of wonder kid quarterback that he can develop, or is he cool with taking Derek Carr and seeing if he can maximize the talent? Again, he's walking to a situation where the Raiders really aren't that bad. So they've got good talent on defense. They have some pretty good offensive players. And he might think that with a guy like Derek Carr, who's, good enough to win in this league, and he's won double-digit games before, that he can be the guy. So I would tend to say no movement on either of those, but you just never know what kind of value a team might get for those guys, and that might force a team to be like, you know what, I'm not going to turn down a couple of second-round picks or a first and a second or something like that.
By the way, while we're on the topic of Russell Wilson, I will be talking to Lofa Tatupo here in about 20 minutes, who covers the Seahawks. He does the Believe in the Seahawks podcast, so I can ask him if he thinks that Russell Wilson wants to be traded. I think that's the big thing here. I'll ask you, though, Moshe, on Russell Wilson, if Howie Roseman picked up the phone, what kind of offer would he have to make?
Well, it kind of depends on who's competing with Howie Roseman. I mean, obviously a first-round pick or two is going to be in the cards, but could Howie get away with 2 first-round picks, and could one of those first-round picks be a future along with one this year? Could it be 2 this year and a future? I don't think he'd have to part with all 3 first-round picks because nobody else has 2 first-round picks to offer other than, I guess,
Jets and
the Giants. And if it's between the Giants and the Eagles,
Giants have
then
5 and 7.
That's true. The Giants are probably their only competition in that regard. But and then I don't know that the Giants are courting Russell Wilson. So
no, but I think adding a new GM and a new head coach, an offensive-minded guy, because we were talking about this with Andrew, I guess, on Tuesday about the Eagles pick 15. Where in the draft is the first team that thinks quarterback?
Well, the Lions pick number 2.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're going to take a quarterback there, but there's nothing stopping them from trading down 8 to 9 slots and taking a quarterback 9, 10, 11. After that, you've got trying to think. It goes Jacksonville. It goes Lions. Who
Detroit.
Else is
yeah. And I'll get it here in a second. 3 is – I just had this up in front of me.
Houston?
Yes, Houston. Here we go. I got it. All right, it's Jacksonville, Detroit, Houston.
Mm-hmm.
The Texans could, right?
They could. Again, it just feels like the way the feedback we get is top 5 is too rich for this quarterback class.
Mm-hmm. The Jets took one at number 2 last year, so I would think they're not a candidate.
Agree.
5 is the Giants.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to take a quarterback 5.
Okay. Carolina is 6.
That's a spot, potentially, if they really love a quarterback. And maybe, again, even if they don't, maybe they trade down to like 10 or 11 with somebody else. So I think a quarterback will probably go a little higher than what people are talking about right now, but I don't think top 5.
Right, because then the Giants pick again at 7. Atlanta is 8, and it's like, all right, are we ready to finally take the guy to replace Matt Ryan, or do we wait another year for that? You've got Denver with their quarterback situation. Like, if they don't get Aaron Rodgers in a trade, do they go through the draft? The Jets pick again, and then you have Washington at 11. I would think they're in play for a quarterback. And I asked this question.
I would think so.
Right, I asked this question with the thought of, if Philadelphia at 15 and no quarterback was taken yet, would Howie Roseman be able to contain himself?
Yes, because at that point, with 2 other first-round picks and the ability to move, he probably feels he could still, if he wanted to do this, get a quarterback late first round. He could trade back in. He could trade the second or the third of the 3 first-round picks and move down into the 20s. I think he would. So if you're like me, I think he will not take a quarterback at 15 overall.
Okay, so
his first round pick.
If you're like me, I don't want them to draft a quarterback in the first round. So if you're like me, do you want quarterbacks to be taken or not to be off the board when you pick?
You want quarterbacks to be not off the board.
So in other words, you want them to not be off the board because this way they're falling back, and that in Howie's mind, hey, I might be able to get one in the second round.
Yes, gotcha. Or very late first. Like he might move down from the second or third pick into the lower half. Lower fifth of the first round.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that's interesting.
You probably wouldn't be upset with that, right? Because if you move down, you're usually acquiring an asset, and then also, even though you move down, you've acquired an asset, and then maybe picked a quarterback to go with it. I don't know how you feel about that.
I don't know. I mean, I want to see them put as much talent on the roster, and you have Hurts. I'm not saying Hurts is the guy. You've got Minshew to back him up. So I think your quarterback position is solid. It's not spectacular, but you can build the team up, and then next year make your evaluation. Did Hurts do enough? And if he didn't, we've got enough on this roster. Now we got to go full force on trying to get our quarterback.
How would you feel if they took a quarterback in the second round then? Is that different to you?
Man, I mean, did I trade Minshew?
Well, it gives you the opportunity to trade Minshew either coming out of training camp or at the deadline.
Yeah.
I only asked that, Mike, because your point was get the best overall team with your assets, right? Build the best overall team. And the Eagles used that philosophy 2 years ago when they picked Hurts, saying, we believe having a great backup quarterback is essential in the NFL as opposed to paying $20 million for one.
Yeah.
So in their minds, they would be, even if Jalen Hurts was the starter and wound up playing great and earning a long-term contract, whoever they took in the second round would be a very good asset for them. And in their thinking of building a great team, or just in general or around Jalen. So,
yep. And then your hope is that Jalen has a really good year and, you have him at a cheap price again.
Jalen?
Yes.
Well, if he has a really good year next year, you would think he would get a long-term deal for that. I mean, you would think he'd be,
I guess,
in line for the contract
next year will be his third.
Yeah.
Right. Next year will be his third year. You're almost thinking of it in that last year was his first year, not his second year. But contractually,
correct, right? Yeah, no, that's why this is such a pivotal year for him, because it's extension time. So it's not just good enough to be good, just kind of good enough to get you seventh. Like, you got to be better, and you got to show the organization that you're going to be the quarterback for the long term, or else they're not going to pay you. Because no matter what, he's going to put up the type of numbers, just like he did this past year, that are going to warrant X amount of $1 million. Even if you're not like top 20 passer, all the rushing touchdowns that he had, the rushing yards. I mean, he could probably, if he was a free agent right now, he'd probably try to look for a contract in excess of $25 million a year. Right. So, I mean, that's why it's such a pivotal year for him and for the franchise.
That's Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. What are some of the things happening this offseason now that you guys are in offseason mode?
Oh, well, it's not the off season for ITB, Mike. You know that we're bringing on 2 shows, and we'll probably have some more things. But this week we started a show for the next 5 weeks with Trey Thomas. It's on our YouTube channel, where he breaks down certain concepts on tape. He did an unbelievable job in show 1, Mike, of breaking down how the Eagles have their protection schemes from an offensive line and running back standpoint as far as blitz pickup. And he noticed a trend in their protection schemes that he thinks doesn't benefit Jalen Hurts really well, and that they could change it to make it better for him. So you can go check it out. And he does such a great job. He does the grease board X's and O's, and then the all 22. So he draws it up for you. Then he shows you with real footage, and he's voiceovering the whole thing. I don't even know how he does it. I don't know how to do that. So it's great stuff. It's called On the Tape with Trey. And then in 2 weeks, Greg Cosell is going to start doing a weekly show with us for the next 10 weeks. First 5 weeks, we'll be breaking down free agent prospects. And then the next 5 weeks, we break down the draft prospects headed up into the NFL draft. So Greg Cosell, Trey Thomas, lots of great content on the Inside the Birds platform. And we're working on some more things as well.
All right, very good. So, of course, Geoff will be back tomorrow. We'll have Super Bowl conversation. We'll have NFL offseason conversation and more here on Football at 4 on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Moshe, I'll talk to you tomorrow, pal.
All right, brother. Have a good one.
All right, Geoff Mosher, Football at 4.